If you're like us, you're probably tired of flipping through outdated and expensive regulation books and struggling to understand the rule or guidance you're after. eRigs is the first web and mobile app version of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, helping fleets of all types and sizes better access and understand their regulatory obligations. eRigs is always up to date and allows fleet safety professionals to not only read the rules, but also dig into FMCSA guidance and learn more about complex regulatory topics from industry experts. Highlight, bookmark, and take detailed notes right from the app and access them on any of your devices. And easily share a digital version of the regulations with your drivers so that they too can better understand the rules. eRigs was developed by safety professionals for safety professionals. Try it out for free at erigs.app. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 42 of Trucksafe Live, the show where we and our guest tackle the hot button issues impacting highway transportation. I'm Brandon, Trucksafe and Childress Law, both of which are dedicated to helping motor carriers develop and maintain cutting-edge safety programs. Got Brian Runnels, Rob Carpenter with me today. Hey guys.
Hey.
You sound excited.
Man.
I told Brian right before we got on the show not to get too excited because his mic sounds terrible when he gets too excited. So he's keeping it calm for me.
I'm easily distortable.
So what's been going on, guys? Anything exciting going on this past week or so? I know Brian, you were at the MC.
ATA, but Rob's was more important. Let him start.
Yeah, well, Rob, we want to talk to you about it last week, but you were in the middle of doing it. So tell us a little bit about some of the emergency relief work that you had been doing.
Yeah, so I'm on a sheriff's office board here in Yorktown, and one of the things we got together with a local roofing company and did was just gather as much as we could, and then we got some donations from other places. I think all in all, we had like 100,000 pounds that we took down to Hickory for a location at Hickory Airport next to ASU. So they were kind of stockpiling everything at ACU, which was feeding these aircrafts, which was good because it was constantly being sent out and flown out. So you didn't have the stockpile issues that you have in other places. So then we took some to Damascus, and then we took some to Bristol Speedway. So
nice.
Good little haul of stuff.
Yeah, you did that for several days, did you?
Yeah. I took my kids along, so it became a family event. I needed help sorting after. I didn't expect the turnout that we got, and then when you get that much stuff, you got to sort it. So it was an event for sure.
Did you get a passenger authorization for your kids?
No, I didn't. They just you're cutting whether you want to or not, or whether someone else wants you to or not.
All right. Well, that's cool. Yeah. Thanks for doing that. Brian, we'll talk about ATA here in a little bit. That's kind of the main topic of today's show. Today we're talking about the American Transportation Research Institute's recently announced top industry issues for 2024. This is something they do every year, and Brian was live and in person at the ATA's conference, MCE conference in Nashville, right?
It was in Nashville, yep.
And that's where they announced it this year. So that's what we're going to get into a little bit later in the show today. Before we do that, I wanted to say, as always, thanks to the sponsor of today's show. Sorry, Rob, this is over your face. Taking the Higher Road, a Legacy Builders and Freightways production. Taking the Higher Road is a special podcast dedicated to addressing the trucking industry's greatest challenges, driver recruiting, retention, and compliance. Each week, host Jeremy Raymer, 20-year industry veteran and founder of Driver Reach and Legacy Builders, interviews industry experts and thought leaders who bring their insights to the driver lifecycle. Check them out wherever you get your podcast. Thanks to Taking the Higher Road. I think he was at MCE, wasn't he, Brian?
Yeah, and you know what? One of the things that he's doing now is and I think it's important to get it out there just for the awareness, is this Project 61.
Yeah.
The average life expectancy for a truck
Here,
driver
show
is
that thing
61.
off.
Yeah. Out of wearing it, got my new fitness tracker and everything, so
Nice.
I can get on the board. I think there's about 300 people on this shared group, just trying to bring awareness to health and fitness for truck drivers. Like I said, the average life expectancy is 61 years old, and
Crazy.
as a 20-year veteran of being over the road, and Rob, you feel it too, man. You think, dang, I'm in my 50s. I'm in my 50s. I don't know if you or not. I can't remember, but thinking about that, it's scary. It's scary, and there needs to be some changes made throughout the whole industry to, get that number much higher. So follow
Pretty
that.
cool.
It's a good.
Yeah, they're doing like a
program.
step challenge, I think, starting November 1st. I think, Rob, you already signed up for that. Brian, you probably have already as well. I need to get
Yep.
signed up for it. But, yeah, pretty cool thing that Jeremy's doing. So be sure to check that out, Project 61, if you haven't already. A couple other things going on. As always, if you haven't joined our Trucksafe Compliance Network yet, be sure to do that. This is free to join over at trucksafenetwork.com. Or you can scan the QR code there or download the app in the App Store or the Google Play Store. This is our online space for safety professionals to gather together, learn from one another, ask questions, and also access all of our DOT-related content. We do a lot of network-exclusive content like our webinar, 7-part webinar series that we're in the middle of still, all about how to improve CSA scores. So a lot of valuable information in the network. Again, free to join. We'd love to have you over there, trucksafenetwork.com. Also, be sure to check out our online courses over at trucksafeacademy.com. We've got all kinds of online courses that we've developed for safety managers and for drivers. We're working on a whole new set of driver courses that Brian and I worked on here recently. Rob worked on and helping us develop the content for it. So looking forward to pushing that out here soon, trucksafeacademy.com. And then also on our last show, we mentioned a couple new services that we've started to offer. And if you're interested, check it out on our website or just give us a ring. First is our micro DOT audits. These are, as the name suggests, they are miniature versions of our standard DOT, mock DOT audits that we have done for years at this point. We had a lot of fleets come to us and say, hey, we want something like that, but not quite as extensive as you being in my facility for 2 or 3 days. So these micro audits are going to make it easier for us to get to a lot more fleets and spend less time looking at them, but still enough time to dig into key safety metrics and take a small sample of your driver records and your hours of service records and stuff like that, kind of give you a quick checkup on your DOT compliance and make sure there are no glaring holes in it. So we got that coming up, and then our boot camp on the road coming off of our Trucksafe boot camp that we held a few weeks ago. We had a lot of interest in us doing like private versions of that for like insurance groups or fleets that have, their own team that they wanted to go through that or put through that training. And so we're going to take it on the road. We're going to go do these private training events for anybody that's interested. Again, we're calling that boot camp on the road. So get in contact with us if you're interested in either of those two services, and we will be glad to jump in and help you out. Anything else I'm missing, guys, on Trucksafe related stuff? I don't think so.
Unless you want to touch on E-regs again.
E-regs, anybody hopefully saw that little intro video that we have playing at the beginning of the episode here. But check out E-regs. It's first app-based digital version of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations that we spent several years building, developing, and finally launched it earlier this year. It's a tool, a good resource for anybody in a fleet safety role to be able to not only read a digital version of the regulations, but also access right next to the regulations all of our educational content to help you better understand what it is that you're reading, and also to be able to share digitally those regulations with your drivers so that they are on top of all of the regulatory requirements. So eregs.app, APP, check that out. All right, That's a lot about us. Hey, if you're here with us live, say hey in the comments so we know who's here. I always like to see who's joining us. If you have any questions or any comments as we go along, as always, be sure to throw them in the comments and we'll get to them as we go. All right, couple of important things going on here in the industry, safety and compliance related, that it's worth talking about. First, we mentioned this on our last show, but I'll mention it again. The FMCSA is going to be holding what it's calling a registration modernization stakeholder meeting on October 21st. They are doing this in person in D.C. at their headquarters, and then also, if you're interested in attending virtually, there's a link on their website for you to register for that event. Again, October 21st in the afternoon, and this is like a sneak peek look at their new registration system that they are in the process of building to modernize it. Anybody who's gotten a DOT number recently within the last several years may be familiar with their unified registration system, URS system, and like I said last show, that thing is showing its age at this point. It is a little rough around the edges, to say the least. So looking forward to seeing what they're going to roll out here soon to take its place. This is also going to, as I understand it, see the end to MC numbers. We're no longer going to have MC numbers. We're only going to have US DOT numbers, and that will be the number that designates you not only for safety purposes, but also if you're an authorized motor carrier, that will be the one number you use to identify your motor carrier authority as well, or broker authority. So be on the lookout for that. Again, if you want to take a look at it, see how it's going to function, that type of stuff, check out that meeting coming up on October 21st. The other thing I saw come through recently, in fact, yesterday, I believe, was this notice from the US DOT. This is a long time coming. Folks who are day in and day out in the safety regulations will know that for many years now, I think probably 10 years, if not more, the FMCSA has allowed motor carriers to generate and to keep safety-related records electronically and to obtain digital signatures on the things that the safety regulations require. So things like, what's a good example, guys? Road tests can be done electronically. Basically anything the safety regulations require in terms of paperwork, the safety regulations have for about 10 years allowed motor carriers to keep that stuff electronically.
Your DQ files and all sorts of stuff.
DQ files, everything. But the one holdout has always been the drug and alcohol testing records. So like the chain of custody forms, everything that's mandated by Part 40 of Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations. There hasn't been an electronic record keeping allowance or digital signature allowance under those rules. Why is that? That's because those rules are not overseen by the FMCSA. They're not enacted by the FMCSA. They are enacted by the US DOT, which is the parent of the FMCSA, because they apply not just to truck drivers, but all modes of transportation, airline pilots, railroad workers, that type of stuff. So they have just been slow to the game when it comes to electronic record keeping. What that has meant for trucking fleets is that even though you've been able to keep all your other safety records electronically, whether you know it or not, the drug and alcohol testing documents are different. There has been no electronic record keeping allowance for them. And so, long story short here, the DOT is finally making some moves in this regard. They have published a notice of proposed rulemaking as of yesterday, October 15th, 2024. Published a notice of proposed rulemaking proposing to amend its regulations to conducting workplace drug and alcohol testing for federally regulated transportation industry to allow, but not require, electronic signatures on documents required to be created and utilized under the regulations, the use of electronic forms, and the electronic storage of forms and data. So I think that's a good development. Yeah, guys, any thoughts on that? Seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, that's definitely a positive. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, very...
No, I was going to say everything else is already there, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
As far
Yeah.
as the one last thing I'm going to add to, it's not really particularly to this one, but I spoke to somebody this week that the PSP for a long time, folks have been wanting to drop the word pre-employment out of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know of how many, because I didn't realize it, but there's actually a standalone bill that's sitting on the floor of Congress right now to do just that. It's not mixed in with a whole bunch of other stuff. So there's not a lot of
The
things that they
idea
have to
being
sift
to
through.
allow carriers to use it for purposes other than just hiring.
Yeah, it would just be kind of like inquiries on the clearinghouse, as far as if you got the right consent form, you can run them at will, and so
I
that's
think
a
that makes
big time
sense.
positive.
It never really made
Yeah.
sense to me that you could only use that for hiring purposes. The PSP, the pre-employment screening program, for folks not familiar with it, is the FMCSA administered system that keeps track of all driver roadside violations and accident data. It's essentially akin to CSA scores for the motor carrier. This is the driver version of that ties violations and accidents to particular drivers, and then anybody who is interested in seeing that data for a particular driver, usually subsequent employers of that driver, they can run a PSP report if they get consent from the driver. They have to pay for it currently. It's not required, but it does cost something. And they run the report, and they will be able to get a report of all, commercial violations and that type of stuff. What happened to Brian here? Brian's frozen. Hold on one second. Adding Brian back in.
Yep. Sorry about
But
that.
yeah, that's all right. But anyway, carriers can run those reports. But yeah, historically, up until this point, they have been only for pre-employment hiring purposes. Technically, carriers cannot run. Keep losing Brian. Technically, they can't run those reports anytime other than onboarding. So yeah, that just never made much sense to me. So maybe they are looking to expand it, and if so, great.
Yeah, it's
Rob,
got. Can you hear me? You just can't see me.
I can hear you, but we
All
can't
right,
see you.
cool. It's got bipartisan support, um, but the one thing that I found out also this week, when you look at the number of bills that have been passed in this particular Congress, it's like 80, and typically the number's up around 300. So they're not making a lot of steps to do much of anything in
Yeah,
this particular Congress cycle, but yeah, it's sitting out there, and I
yeah, that'll
think
be
just like
interesting.
this would be a positive deal.
Yeah, I just don't have much faith in Congress anymore. Wonder why. Uh,
Right.
uh, yeah. Okay. Well, move on. Hey, Brian, try and join again because
Yep.
I want to get your video up if we can. Rob, I saw this come through. I know you posted something about this, and so I thought I'd show it. Well, first of all, this was
Musk.
it's, oh, yeah, Musk. First of all, hopefully everybody saw this pretty incredible uh, launch from earlier this week. Did you see this, Rob?
Yeah, I've never really got into this whole space thing until SpaceX actually started. But I mean, I think one of the things that I took away from it that was probably more important than the actual event was that Elon Musk is kind of what his team makes him. So if you're picking the right people, it's going to get you where you want to go.
Yeah, this is just nuts to me. They land for folks just listening in. They landed this like 250-ton rocket. They caught it in midair with like these chopstick things. It was just incredible to watch. So
It's
pretty
amazing.
crazy. Yeah. And then the other thing I saw you did post about this, Rob. Elon's tweeting that his prediction is that within 50 years, all transport will be fully autonomous. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think working with different companies that I work with on the autonomous side, and you work with autonomous companies on the overall truck safe side. I mean, just the as far as we've gotten in just a few years, it would be hard pressed not to be there in 50 years or maybe even 30 years. But it's progressed so much so fast already, and it's only getting better all the time. Well, I say better, but it's getting more
Relative.
advanced. Let's put it that way. So
Because I saw that other event that Elon did right before they landed that rocket, where they were rolling out their new fully autonomous taxi service with cars and vans. They look pretty crazy. Definitely
Well,
futuristic.
they've been running those things around Phoenix for what 3-4 years now. That Waymo
Yeah,
product.
Waymo. There's a few others as well. Yeah.
And if you've ever been in one, quite honestly, once you get over the shock of not having a driver in it, that thing is computer trained to keep following distance and keep speed and things like that. And you actually get to feel more safe in it than you do with, a typical Uber driver.
Yeah, I haven't ridden in one. Have you guys ridden in one of those?
Yeah.
yeah, there's a Beep bus too. Beep is down. I mean, they've got some government contracts now, like Yellowstone Park, and you can ride. I've ridden theirs down in Orlando, but I mean, just getting here it was a feat, right? So I think 30, 50 years from now, if we're still here,
Yeah, I mean that's a long way off.
yeah,
Lots of stuff could happen in
no
between.
doubt.
Sure.
So yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that progresses. I know in trucking alone, autonomy is a big topic of discussion. The FMCSA and NHTSA, which is the agency that regulates manufacturers of vehicles, they have been in talks for many years now to push forward some regulations on autonomous commercial motor vehicles, which they have not done to date, even though we have autonomous trucks running throughout the country, namely in Texas. In and around Texas is where you see them most often. But they're a little bit behind the ball on moving forward with those regulations. Right now, there just aren't any regulations. And so there's some informal guidance from FMCSA and from NHTSA on that topic. But I would have to imagine that those regulations are going to be coming out sooner than later. It's always on the agenda. It's just they can never get the thing across the finish line. So
All of my stuff
CVS.
has
Go ahead,
come
Rob.
from SAE. I think SAE is probably the most advanced in terms of like what's going on in the autonomous world. So
they're the ones that set the different levels of autonomy, right?
yeah,
Yeah. What were you going to say, Brian?
Well, they've started putting some like operational guidances in, like you were talking about with CVSA. Like the one they were talking about this week was triangles, safety triangles.
Oh, yeah.
How exactly do you manage that if the truck's broke down on the side of the road? So they're starting to put in play and looking at the different regulations that they're going to have to tinker with to make it autonomous friendly.
Yeah.
And starting that process.
Plus inspections, like how are the roadside inspections of those things going to play out, and also rules about rules for the folks that are back in the office remotely controlling those things. Like they're talking, do those folks need to be subject to hours of service rules and drug and alcohol testing? And so there's a lot of things to think about. I know, Brian, you and I talked about on past shows, once we get to that level, right now we're in a stage where so many of the violations and so much of the exposure we see in trucking comes from the driver side of things, with drivers either not having the right license or not complying with the hours of service rules or being impaired and that type of stuff. And once the scales start to tip in favor of autonomous vehicles, it's like it's going to be a seismic shift towards more vehicle maintenance type issues and products liability type stuff, more so than the drivers, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, there was a vendor this week that was right next to where we were. I was there with TVC, and they do these sensors that go on the inside of tires, not on the inside on the wheel. They do have that option, but these are actually attached to the tire, and they measure everything from tread depth to heat to air pressure. And he pointed it out that they're looking more towards the autonomous vehicle maintenance than the actual person driven. I mean, it's still a great product for them too, but it's aimed at the driverless truck.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it makes total sense that we're going to start to see more and more vendors enter this space that are going to be focused on that. The other thing that came to mind while you were talking about that, because I know on our last show we talked about briefly level 8 inspections, essentially electronic inspections, kind of powered by like the DriveWise and the pre-pass technology, and how CVSA is kind of starting to pilot that in various states and with particular carriers. But that's probably going to be a big part of inspections for autonomous trucks, I would imagine, is having them pass through or pass by one of the receivers and then just sending digital electronic information about the fleet and that type of stuff, and then the law enforcement can decide whether to pull them over or not. I guess that's how it would work if I had to imagine. But anyway, all right. One other thing here. This is an article that we released or we published earlier this week at Trucksafe. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter, I recommend you do that. We're pushing out a lot of DOT compliance related content, videos, and articles. We published one this week titled Combating Distracted Driving and Crafting an Effective Policy. This is something that came up pretty frequently during our boot camp. Brian did a whole presentation on policies and guidance at fleets, and it spurred a lot of good questions. And we have a lot of fleets that approach us to kind of look through their policies and give our thoughts about it. And one that comes up pretty frequently are distracted driving policies, and do we need one? What does it need to entail? What are the different types of distractions that we need to address, and how do we handle it if our drivers are found in violation of the policy? So we kind of laid it all out in this most recent article that is up on our website. And we also have a video on it on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out. I mean, distraction continually ranks up there as one of the top contributors to accidents, serious accidents. So it's a big problem. I know, Rob, you talk about it a lot on your social media. And big problem that we need to get control of. Not just drivers. This isn't just a driver problem. This is a problem that goes all the way up to the carriers as well. Sometimes the carriers are the worst offenders at causing distractions with all of the messages that they're sending out to their drivers. And so check out that article if you haven't already. Distracted driving, man, seems like we can never really get our arms wrapped around that.
That's going to be one of the big, I think that's going to be one of the big programs that ATA does this coming years. They were looking for ideas and suggestions and thoughts behind what would a good distracted driving program look like, and so a lot of good ideas came up, and it's obviously just not the phones anymore. It came up to what you're talking about, all the messages coming in, the interactions between company and driver, and then you've got your TikTok and your videos and movies, and it's just wide open of all the different types of distractions that are out there.
Rob, you've got like terabytes of video of your drivers in the past doing some crazy stuff while they're behind the wheel, don't you?
A weird thing that I did last year was there was a girl that got killed. She was like 24, like last August. And I went into the company and I looked at their video footage the 30 days post that crash. And you're thinking, hey, as a carrier who was just involved with a fatality that they clearly caused, we know they caused it, that you would like mind your P's and Q's absolutely for at least a period, right? But for that 30-day period, it didn't actually decrease. It increased. It was as if it was of no consequence. So it's crazy to see some of the videos and how frequently it happens. So it's one thing to know it exists, but it's another thing completely to manage it and to manage it effectively. So it can be a tough thing to manage simply because of the scalability that you need to be able to manage it. So it takes a lot of people in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, as we're constantly preaching, all it takes is one of those bad accidents caused by distraction to, completely screw up your trucking company, truck or bus company, and that's a regular contributor to these so-called nuclear verdicts that we see coming up more and more frequently. So yeah, again, you can't overstress how big of a problem that is. And as Brian said, not just cell phones and texting anymore. Those are still a big problem, obviously, and a lot of fleets and drivers don't realize that's baked into the regulations now. That if you get convicted of texting while driving or using a handheld device while driving, twice in a 3-year period, you're going to be disqualified from driving a commercial motor vehicle for a period of time. You're not just fines, you're not going to be able to drive anymore. And then it just, the consequences go up from there. So important to get hold of. And we've got a lot of thoughts on that topic. So if you have any questions about your particular policy on that topic or anything like that, feel free to give us a shout. Okay, so moving into the topic of today, which is, again, the ATRI's annual list of top industry issues was announced at the ATA conference earlier this week. Brian was in attendance, so Brian, you want to give us a kind of a report of the conference overall, what what you saw, what sessions they had, what was the conference like, who attended, that type of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So this is their big management conference that happens every year. Like you said, it was down in Nashville. It's filled with educational sessions, guest speakers. Chris Spear always gives his kind of the state of the industry address. There's always an economic piece to it. That's taken from where our booth was. Like I said, I was there with TVC Pro Driver, and Carl Rove spoke, and that was an interesting one. It's kind of like what can you expect from trucking inside of broken politics? So that was interesting. I'm on the
here. I'll bring up the slide for that because you sent us the slide. Maybe it's kind of related to that.
Yeah, this was from the Safety Policy Committee. I'm on that committee, and this just kind of went into what can you expect, or what they think you could expect depending on which side gets in. And, a couple of the big ones is for California drivers and companies operating in California, theirs on the hours of service. The Democrats don't want to preempt that. They want to follow that California meal and rest rules, and on the Republican side, they want to go more towards what the federal rules are. So that's probably the biggest thing there. The side underride guard protection, that is, that's something the Democrats would want to look at. Plus, they'd probably be a lot quicker to rule on the speed limiters than the Republicans would. I think that, like anything in business on the Republican side, they'll incentivize adoption of the safety technologies and things like that, to where the Democrats are more for mandates and mandated, like with the underride guards and stuff like that, to where the Republicans are more interested in a best practice type.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's painting with a broad brush here, but generally speaking, I think what you can expect with a Republican administration when it comes to trucking specifically is usually kind of a rollback of regulation, whereas with a Democratic administration, you tend to see more regulation, which is in line with the mindsets of those two parties anyway. So yeah, I mean, we're coming up on it. Just a few weeks away from election day here in the United States. So, yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out and whether we end up with yet another FMCSA administrator. I think we're on like our 8th or 9th one or 10th one. It may be even more than that. I don't know. And the agency's only been around since 2000, I believe. No, it's been 2008, I think, was when It may have been it's either 2000 or 2008. I don't know why those two dates stand out in my mind, but a very short period of time for that many administrators through the FMCSA. So kind of like a revolving door. So we'll have to, because they just put a new one in, a deputy administrator in within the last couple months. And so if Trump takes office, then I have to imagine that we will get yet another FMCSA administrator with his or her own priorities. And then it will certainly influence the agenda when it comes to rulemaking. So, be on the lookout for that for sure. All right, I interrupted you, Brian. Sorry.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is one of the things that they brought up was whoever gets in, you're probably going to have a divided Congress, Senate. Yeah. One's going to be Republican, one's going to be Democrat. So, with that being said, I don't know how much will actually get done, but maybe that's not a bad thing either. We're still waiting on, and, going to ATRI's deal, the top 10 issues. CSA still ranks up there, and it'll be interesting to see if either side will put any pressure on to get that part of it done. So there it is, divided between and that's always an interesting list. How the difference between what the truck drivers said and what the motor carriers said, and just about anything that ATRI does requires drivers and motor carriers and stakeholders in the industry to be involved in these reports. So when something comes out, get yourself involved and put your 2 cents in, because it does make a difference on this stuff. And, we talked about CSA. It's up a couple, I think it was total is 8th, but on the motor carrier list, it sits 6th, and it's not even on the truck driver list. So that tells me a lot. It's been that way for a couple years now. The farther we get away from 2010, when this went into effect, the less important it's becoming to drivers. Now that there are motor carriers out there that do a good job of educating drivers and saying the importance, but that is a small microcosm of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, when CSA was originally pushed out, before it was originally pushed out in 2010, the FMCSA had proposed not only the motor carriers' safety measurement system scores, the CSA scores, but they had also proposed what they called a driver safety measurement system, DSMS, which would have been a scoring methodology for drivers. So drivers would have had CSA scores as well. And that never got pushed forward. The only way it got pushed forward was in the form of that PSP program, which we already talked about, the pre-employment screening program. And so with that being the case, that drivers don't get a CSA score, it's not all that surprising to me that it doesn't rank up there on the list of top 10 issues for drivers. Certainly for motor carriers feel the pain of their CSA scores pretty much daily at this point. So many eyeballs on a carrier's CSA score that impact a motor carrier's business, whether it be, the insurance carriers or brokers or customers looking at CSA scores, or certainly law enforcement or FMCSA looking at it, the plaintiff's bar. Everybody wants to know how the carrier is performing relative to their peers from a safety and compliance standpoint, and CSA is the way to do that. And if you have poor CSA scores, you're going to lose business, you're going to be escalated for audit, you're going to potentially lose contracts, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. So no surprise there. But just to set up this list a little bit before we dig into it a little bit more. Again, American Transportation Research Institute is a kind of a nonprofit body that studies a lot of issues in the transportation industry, and they put out a lot of good reports each year. As Brian said, there's a lot of participants in all of their studies. They do a really good job of getting a good cross section of the industry when it comes to responses to their surveys and stuff like that. And so they're the ones, for example, that put out the nuclear verdict study that we are always referencing in most of our content. But they do this particular study, which is the top industry industry issues every year, and they put out this list. As Brian said, they split it in between what are the top 10 issues as reported by truck drivers, and what are the top 10 issues as reported by motor carriers. And the list that we're showing on the screen right now is those two lists right next to each other, so you could see which issues are important to drivers as compared to motor carriers and vice versa. So this was announced at the ATA conference earlier this week. So you could see here, the number one issue for motor carriers in 2024 is the economy. No surprise there. And then the number one issue for truck drivers is truck parking. So I'm interested to get your guys' thoughts on those two issues. Rob, I know you just put out an article, I think, on truck parking recently.
Yeah, I've never I guess I understand like the concern of not wanting to pay for it. No driver wants to spend more money than they have to, especially the fact that we're already paying. I don't know how many people have ever been to a truck stop, but last time I went to a truck stop was about 2 months ago. I bought a half a turkey sandwich on wheat and 2 energy drinks and a water, and it was $27. So when you're paying that kind of price, you're thinking that, all right, well, for that price, I should be able to park for free.
Maybe it's
and I
the
think
wheat bread that screwed you.
it was, I guess, but I mean, those bikes would have been cheaper, but and it wasn't good. So, but the driver mindset goes to, if I'm paying this much, all right, fine, I'm paying this much, but I'm paying that much to have parking overnight so I can stay here. And so I kind of empathize with that, but on the other hand, there's the dilemma of paying to park with like Truck Parking Club and some of the other groups that are charging people to park. And I think the issue there is coming where they're going to places that are historically free is the argument, and they're turning historically free parking into paid parking, and that's where I think
Is that
a
true?
lot.
Because my understanding of it was that they were finding new places that were not even parking beforehand.
That's the marketing side of it, but
Oh, okay.
they are
I bought
partnering with.
into their marketing.
Yeah. But they are parking it. They are partnering with certain truck stops and places that are already free or have historically been free,
Hmm.
and they're kind of turning it into paid. But truck stops had already started going that route before. We have reserved parking. I've never had to pay for parking ever in 20 years. So a lot of it for me goes to trip planning, and I think some of that goes to the difference in driver persona from like let's just say a pre 2005 licensed driver that really planned their trip. They kind of knew where they were going to stop versus what we have now today where it's like, tell me where to stop, tell me where to go. So some of it is I'm split on. Like I think sometimes you need to take the initiative to figure it out, and then if you don't figure it out and you're going to let someone else figure it out for you, you need to be prepared to pay for that convenience. So
Yeah.
you just have to be able to self-reflect and say, hey, somebody's going to find my parking for me. I need to pay them for it.
Yeah. What about you, Brian? Brian and Rob are both drivers in the past, so.
Yeah, I agree with Rob on the point of, you plan your trips out the best you can. Nothing's 100%, and I get that. And it's easier, definitely easier in the areas that I drove. I was a guy that went from Ohio west, and terminals for me were in the worst parts as far as parking. Seattle, Portland, I had a terminal to go to. So it was, I did that on purpose, quite honestly. And that was part of the reason why. Now, I will say that states like Indiana, they've invested in quite a bit of new truck parking. I don't know if either one of you guys have seen the new facility up on 65, just south of Merrillville. Good heavens, that new welcome center is enormous, and I know some of the other states are doing things like that, and the federal government has put out quite a bit of money for states to do this. It's not an overnight fix, and by the time we get it, we'll probably have outgrown it, but at least we're doing something. But yeah, the truck parking is a huge issue. The other part of that issue is too, by and large, the industry works mostly days now, and there isn't the flexibility in the hours of service. I'm like, that's an argument we can keep going back to, but that flexibility isn't what it used to be able to move in the wee hours and, run a little bit later because you were able to take a decent enough break. And so I
By
think that's part of
flexibility,
it.
do you mean your second logbook?
No, I didn't have to go that far. It's
Okay.
just, I could the old 5 and 5 split or
I got you.
something like that. I going through Chicago, if I saw that if I didn't have 3 hours to get from south to north, all right, I'll stop. I could take a 4 or 5 hour nap, wait till 9 p.m. instead of going in there at 5 p.m. and get through there in an hour and a half. That
Yeah.
flexibility is not there anymore.
Yeah.
So
Now you just got the 7-3 or 8-2 split.
yeah. If you know how to do it, and quite honestly,
Right.
it's a lot easier now than what it was because the ELD will do it for you. But
Yeah.
once again, that comes back to trip planning, knowing that, okay, this is when I'm going to hit up there. I either stay here and take a break or I go up as close as I can get and take some sort of break and
Yeah.
not burn all that time going through there. And so,
Still,
I
our
think
number
that
one
plays.
top performing video of all time is our split sleeper berth video.
And freight, quite honestly, I've preached on this now for a long time. Freight has changed. Freight is much more regionalized. It's much more 250 miles at a shot than 500 miles at a shot. So you've got more trucks in a smaller area than you've ever had because they're not running as many miles. So it takes almost two trucks now to do what one truck did pre 2010, 2005, whatever that is. Back when Rob and I were really driving hard, you you've got double the amount of trucks doing the same amount of miles.
Yeah.
So that also means you've got double the amount of trucks trying to find a place to park in a more congested area.
Well,
Another piece.
go ahead, Rob.
Go ahead, Brandon. I'll remember mine.
I was just gonna say the other thing that I'm just thinking out loud here, and I know this is a ways off if we ever get there, but maybe if for nothing else, autonomous trucking will help out with the parking issue a little bit by taking the number of trucks with drivers off the road. Obviously, that comes at a big cost. I realize that as I'm saying those words, is the benefit of that is the less of a need for parking, but the cost of that is fewer drivers. So
You're going to get canceled.
I'm not going to get canceled, Rob. If anybody's going to get us canceled, it's going to be you.
Yeah, the HR piece has to come in somewhere to monitor Rob. No, but one of the things that also got a little contentious was gated and signed lots. And that's one of the things that I always thought was a good benefit of Front Parking Club, because a lot of like those private parking locations are gated and signed private property. And, when I was coming back from Indiana, I still have the videos from it from the dash cam. And I tried to stop and talk to one of the state troopers because as I passed, it was literally a state trooper sitting beside every truck going into this public parking lot. And they were knocking on the door, waking them up and pulling them into the rest area to do a full roadside. So I pulled in and said, "Hey, can I talk to you when you're finished with that?" And he's like, "I can't talk about it. You got to talk to our media guy." But, I always thought that was a benefit because instead of parking at, on that on or off ramp or public parking where it's publicly accessible highway, where people can get to you, you can actually go park at, a private gated signed lot, and you've kind of got some protection there, I think.
Yeah. Makes sense. The other one that was that was the number one issue for truck drivers for 2024, and then for motor carriers, the number one issue was the economy. Brian, I know you're giving us an update. I think ATA's Bob Costello, who's an economist, I think. He kind of gave an update. You want to kind of relay that information?
Yeah, the long and the short of it, and definitely paraphrasing what Bob said, is the economy is going to go back to normal, or he's predicting that it's going to go back to normal pre 2019, because after 2019, the economy has been in disarray first for the positive and then for the negative, and now things are kind of leveling out. He stated that the U.S. economy grows at about a 2% rate every year, and it looks like 2024 is going to be at like 1.9, and he's predicting about the same for 2025. There's sectors of manufacturing and stuff that are up. There's stuff that's down. I think the durable goods, I think that was up, and the non-durable goods were down. And so it's nothing really exciting to report. We're not going to see a total boom as far as trucking goes, but things are going to look a
Level
little
out.
bit better. And interest rates have come down a little bit, so that's got maybe the housing piece moving a little bit again, because there wasn't anything being built when we were at 7% or 8%, but now I think
when
it's
sheets
down
of
to,
plywood were like $100.
yeah, right. So now we're down to 5%, and maybe the housing will start up again, and that's one of the three big sectors for trucking is construction.
Yeah.
So, that it was a mixed bag, but nothing really exciting, and it's still something to be worried about.
Okay. All right, number 2 on the list for truck drivers was driver compensation. This is something I don't really have a pulse on. What are your guys' take on driver compensation, if you have a pulse on it?
Well, I definitely have I have a feeling on this, and the driver compensation is suffering for what I just said before. Freight has changed. However, the compensation for drivers hasn't changed, meaning how they're getting paid. One of ATRI's reports last year showed that pre 2015 or something like that, it was right around that year, it was 2,500 miles per truck was the average. Now we're down at 1,600 miles per truck. However, the way those drivers are getting paid, and quite honestly, the amount that they're getting paid hasn't changed all that much. So compensation problems are real. And I know some carriers are looking for that alternative way to pay, whether it's hourly, whether it's by the load, whether it's percentage. There's a lot of different thoughts behind that. But until we fix how we pay drivers, for the most part, it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, I haven't done much work in this area, but I know that there have been many ways over the years that truck and bus companies have paid drivers, whether it be by the hour or by the mile, and it also heavily dependent on what type of fleet you have, whether it's a contractor fleet or a company driver fleet. And so it seems like fleets are always on the lookout for the new way to kind of pay drivers, and you're kind of balancing several different things with that, obviously. Trying to make the drivers happy, trying to make money as a fleet, and just a lot that goes into it. And sounds like it's still up there, obviously number 2 on the list of issues for drivers, and I imagine that that's going to be perpetually up on the top 10 list for drivers. And the question is going to be, where does that land on the motor carrier side? I'm looking at it here; it's not on the motor carrier side. I think it has been on the motor carrier side in the past, but I don't see it up there this year. Rob, any additional thoughts on driver pay?
The only one that I have on that is like I've always been more in favor of pay by the hour. I mean, obviously, when I drove getting paid by the mile, I'd rather be paid by that. But I also had a lot more logbooks than you're allowed to have now. So in modern day times, with regs what they are, I think anytime you do like per load pay or per mileage pay, it's going to incentivize that rogue outlaw type issue.
Especially with detention time.
Yeah.
Essentially, you're not getting paid for sitting there for 3 hours while you're waiting on the shipper or receiver.
Yeah, especially like with drivers like port and drayage and stuff like that. But the hourly thing has the potential to go backwards. People will possibly milk the clock, and then to get as much money as they can. So it's going to lead to less productive drivers. So I think that's always been the argument of a lot of carriers. It's like,
I saw this I was doing a mock audit for a fleet couple months ago, and we were looking at logs. We were looking at actually time records for this carrier's short haul drivers. And one of the things the DOT does with logs that we do in our mock DOT audits is you check those things for falsification, in part by comparing them against time records or bills of lading or whatever, fuel records, anything that identifies where a driver was and what they were doing at a particular time of the day that you can cross-reference against their logs. And I had picked my sample of drivers and found one guy that was routinely stealing like 3 hours of time from this carrier every single day. Like he was indicating that he went on duty 3 hours earlier than he actually did when we started comparing it against the supporting documents. And so that dude got fired from my mock audit. I feel a little bit bad about that for him, but not so bad about it for the client that had brought me in. So yeah, that seems to be an issue for sure. All right, let's see here. Richard's asking a question. Richard, what are you saying? What about people that use inhalers for COPD? I don't know what you mean by that question. Are you saying that is that a disqualifying thing under the physical requirements? I don't know. Maybe clarify your question, and we can get to. You guys have any idea what he's talking about?
I don't. I've been looking at that one, trying to figure it out.
Okay. All right, so that was number 2 for drivers. Number 2 for motor carriers is lawsuit abuse reform. So this has started to creep up on this list over the last several years. This is becoming more and more of a problem. We saw big news, I think it was last year. There were like, I forget how, it was over 50 the last time I checked, people indicted, I think, for a staged accident in Louisiana, if I remember correctly. Yeah, where lawsuit abuse takes several forms, including these staged accidents against trucking companies. I think in that case there were lawyers indicted. There may have been some insurance folks indicted in this scheme to defraud the carrier and their insurer by staging these accidents, and then also these nuclear verdicts that we're seeing, where this reptilian theory of liability, where the plaintiff's attorneys make the case more about the carrier's reputation than the accident at hand, and that leads to these multi-million-dollar jury verdicts because the jury gets mad at the carrier for having poor safety metrics and that type of stuff. An abuse of the legal system in many cases, and so it's been a big problem. It's becoming a bigger problem, and we're starting to see some reform. It's usually called lawsuit abuse reform or tort reform. We're seeing more and more states start to pass legislation on that topic to try and get control of the issue. Florida and Texas have been states that have recently passed that type of legislation to try and get control of that issue. But I think that's the solution to it, is we got to get control of it, usually through legislation. So anyway, no surprise that that's up there. Running out of time here. Let's at least get to the top 5 here. So
yeah,
go ahead,
Brandon. Let me jump in real quick because I think I can combine some of those if you bring that screen back up. Number 2 on the driver's side. Number 2, number 3. No, sorry. Number 2, number 4. Possibly number 5 on the motor carrier side. Those are directly tied to each other. They really, really are. With the lawsuit abuse, it makes it harder to get insurance because especially larger carriers where they're trying to build these big towers to protect themselves. There's only so many players in the insurance world that will be in those spots on those towers. And those companies are leaving left and right out of the trucking world because it's not profitable for them.
Yeah.
On the ATRI report, as far as the operational cost to do business, everything was down or stayed the same from last year to this year. With driver wages and all this other stuff, except insurance costs. It went up 12.4%.
Yep.
So even companies that are doing good are still getting hit.
Yeah.
I was going to say a lot of these are tied to, I was surprised how far CSA was on the carrier side, because the CSA is and its SMS is so indicative of how you operate as a carrier, how you treat your drivers, how you treat your trucks, what you'll tolerate and what you won't, and that scoring methodology can often be indicative of how you operate as a carrier, which affects like 90% of the things on this list, whether it's how long drivers stay with you and whether you can retain them, your insurance costs and the ability to renew insurance, diesel technician shortages and maintenance scores. So it's like it affects so many different things on here. I'm surprised that it's not at least in the top 3. So then again, on the same
good.
No, then again on the same token, you've got like broker issues is number 6 under truck drivers. When truck drivers don't always, I don't think, understand. It's often the truck drivers that are undercutting other truck drivers. So I think to some extent there was an ignorance into who actually responded to this thing on both sides.
Yeah. Any surprises from your perspective, Brian, with the list, either the truck drivers or the carriers?
Well, it's curious to me on the truck driver side that they're worried about the training standards, and I find that.
Yeah, what are they even talking about there?
Yeah, I think a lot of truck drivers that respond, to your point, Rob, are probably owner operators. So yes, the broker issues is a big deal to them, and maybe that's the same thought process when it comes to are the new drivers coming in trained well. And maybe it's just because they have to share the road with them. If that's the reason why, then okay, I get it. But to have it be that high on the list, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, that is a bit surprising.
Yeah, that's the one I find most surprising.
Okay. Well, we are out of time. Appreciate everybody joining us today. It's always good to look at those type of lists to keep a pulse on what's going on in the industry, what's important for fleets and for their drivers. So, thanks for being here with us. Stay tuned for announcements about our next shows. And like I said, best way to keep up to date with everything we got going on at Trucksafe is by subscribing to our newsletter over at trucksafe.com/subscribe. That's all I got. Thanks, Brian, Rob. Appreciate you being with me. We'll see everybody later. See ya.